The alarm bells rang through the corridors of the UES horizon as Captain Jake Morrison rushed toward the bridge, his boots echoing against the metal floors with each hurried step that carried him closer to what he sensed would be terrible news. From home. The year 2387 had started like any other for the human mining vessel, with routine operations in the Kepler 442 system, where they extracted valuable minerals from the asteroid belt that orbited the distant star. But now something had changed as the emergency beacon from Earth cut through the silence of space with its urgent digital cry. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez looked up from her communications console with worry written across her face as she turned to face her captain, who had just entered the bridge where the main screen displayed the incoming transmission symbol that meant someone from high command needed to speak with them immediately. "Sir, we have a priority message from Admiral Kate Sullivan at Earth Defense Command," Maya said with tension in her voice that made everyone on the bridge stop their work and turn their attention to the large screen where the Admiral's face would soon appear with news from the homeworld. Jake nodded and straightened his uniform as he prepared to receive what he feared might be bad news from the capital world of humanity, where the Galactic Confederation maintained its embassy, and where human leaders tried to maintain peaceful relationships with dozens of alien species who had been traveling between the stars for thousands of years. The screen flickered to life, and Admiral Sullivan's stern face appeared with the kind of expression that military officers learned to dread, because it meant their peaceful lives were about to change in ways they could not yet imagine, but would soon understand with painful clarity. "Captain Morrison, I'm sending you classified information that changes everything we thought we knew about humanity's place in the galaxy," the Admiral said with a voice that carried the weight of terrible knowledge that she now had to share with human commanders. Across known space, the Confederation Council met in emergency session yesterday on Nexus Prime, where they discussed what they call the human problem. She continued as her image remained steady on the screen, while her words traveled across the vast distances between stars to reach the crew of the mining vessel. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he listened to the Admiral explain how the ancient Vorthak Empire and their allies had grown concerned about human expansion and technological development over the past 50 years, since humanity had joined the galactic community as junior members. "They've issued an ultimatum," Admiral Sullivan said with anger barely controlled in her voice as she delivered the news that would change everything for the human species and their hopes for a peaceful future among the stars. The ultimatum demanded that humanity abandon all colonies beyond the Sol system and submit to what the aliens called guided development, under the direct supervision of Confederation overseers who would control human research and expansion for the foreseeable future. Dr. Alan Carter, the ship's science officer who had spent years studying alien cultures and their histories, stepped forward with his face pale as he absorbed the implications of what they had just heard from the Admiral's transmission. "This isn't about expansion or resources," Alan said quietly as he looked around the bridge at his fellow humans who were beginning to understand that their species faced a crisis unlike anything in their history. "They're afraid of us," he continued with certainty in his voice that came from years of studying how alien civilizations had maintained their power structures for millennia, without significant change or challenge. The Vorthak Empire had ruled vast sections of the galaxy for over 10,000 years using the same technologies and social systems that their ancestors had developed in the distant past, when humans were still learning to make fire in caves on Earth. But humanity had changed everything in just 1 century of galactic membership by developing new forms of quantum drive technology that allowed faster travel between stars and terraforming techniques that could turn dead worlds into gardens, in a fraction of the time it took other species. Maya suddenly looked up from her console where she had been, monitoring encrypted channels that carried secret messages between various alien governments and their military forces throughout the galaxy. "Captain, I'm picking up coded transmissions between Vorthak fleet commanders," she reported with urgency, as she decoded the alien signals that revealed the true scope of the threat facing humanity. The intercepted messages showed that multiple alien species were already moving their military fleets toward human space under the pretense of conducting routine training exercises that would position them perfectly for a coordinated attack on human worlds. Engineer Ben Parker, who had been quietly listening from his position near the engine controls, spoke up with the kind of practical wisdom that came from years of keeping complicated machines running in the hostile environment of deep space. "They're not giving us a choice," Ben said simply as he looked at the tactical display that showed the positions of known alien fleets relative to human colonies, scattered across dozens of star systems. Jake realized that his ship and crew faced an impossible decision that would affect not only their own survival but potentially the fate of the entire human species, in their struggle to remain free in a galaxy that seemed determined to crush their independence. The mining operation they had been conducting in the Kepler 442 system suddenly seemed trivial compared to the magnitude of the crisis that now demanded their immediate attention, and possibly their lives in service to their species. He could send half his crew back to Earth aboard the ship's auxiliary vessel to warn the homeworld about what they had discovered, while taking the remaining crew members deeper into unexplored space, where they might find something that could help humanity survive. The decision tore at him as he looked around the bridge, at the faces of people who had served with him for years and who trusted him to make the right choice, even when all the options seemed to lead toward disaster. Admiral Sullivan's final words echoed in his mind as he considered the alternatives that lay before them in the next few minutes when he would have to choose between certain safety and unknown danger. "We have maybe 6 months before they move against us," the Admiral had said before ending her transmission with orders for all human vessels to prepare for the worst, while hoping for some kind of miracle. Jake took a deep breath and made the decision that would send half his people toward home while leading the others into the unknown regions of space where ancient secrets waited in the darkness between stars. 6 months had passed since the ultimatum reached the crew of the UES Horizon, and Jake Morrison had made his fateful decision to split his crew and ventured deeper into the Kepler 442 system, while half his people returned to Earth with the terrible news about humanity's impending doom. The remaining crew members had thrown themselves into their work with desperate intensity as they searched the outer planets of the system for anything that might help their species survive the coming war against impossible odds that grew worse with each passing day. Earth and the outer colonies were mobilizing every available ship for the defense of human space, but their combined fleet numbered only in the hundreds, while intelligence reports suggested the Confederation could field thousands of vessels from dozens of different alien species. Chief Engineer Ben Parker had been pushing his mining equipment beyond safe limits as he conducted deep-core drilling operations on the system's 4th planet, where his sensors had detected unusual metal signatures buried far beneath the frozen surface. The planet was a dead world that had lost its atmosphere billions of years ago, but something deep in its core had been calling to Ben's instruments with readings that made no sense according to everything humans knew about planetary geology, and mineral formation. Amy Foster had joined the mining operation as the team's archaeologist because the metal signatures showed patterns that suggested artificial construction rather than natural mineral deposits formed by geological processes over millions of years. When Ben's drilling equipment finally broke through into a vast underground chamber, the team discovered ruins that defied everything they thought they knew about the history of the galaxy and the civilizations that had come before the current dominant species. The structures were impossibly old, according to Dr. Foster's analysis of the construction materials and architectural techniques that predated even the ancient Vorthak Empire by millions of years. When most current species were still primitive creatures on their homeworlds, Communications Officer Lisa Grant had been working to decode the strange symbols and energy patterns they found throughout the ruins, when her equipment suddenly began responding to her presence in ways that no human technology should have been able to achieve. The central spire of the ruined city contained a vast data archive that seemed to recognize human DNA and began displaying information in languages that slowly shifted and changed until they became recognizable to the human exploration team. Alan Carter realized they had discovered the remains of the architects, the mysterious race that had built the hyperspace gate network, connecting star systems throughout the galaxy before vanishing without explanation from galactic history. The archive revealed the terrible truth about what had happened to the architects, and why no trace of them had survived in the records kept by current galactic civilizations, who used their technology every day without understanding its origins. The architects had not simply vanished from the galaxy as most species believed, but had been systematically exterminated by a coalition of younger species who feared their technological superiority and their influence over the development of galactic civilization, The Vorthok Empire had been among the primary conspirators in this ancient genocide that had wiped out an entire species whose only crime had been advancing too quickly and sharing their knowledge too freely with other developing civilizations. Jake felt sick as he read the historical records that described how the architects had tried to defend themselves but had been overwhelmed by the coordinated attacks of dozens of species who had united in their fear and jealousy of superior technology. The parallels to humanity's current situation were impossible to ignore as the team realized they were facing the same fate that had befallen the architects millions of years ago, when progress and innovation had been seen as threats to the established order. But the architects had been preparing for their own destruction and had left behind contingency plans hidden in secure archives throughout the galaxy, where they hoped future species might discover them and learn from their mistakes. The archive's artificial intelligence spoke to them through holographic projections that showed the faces of long-dead architects who had worked desperately to preserve their knowledge before the final attacks that would end their civilization forever. The AI explained that it had been waiting for eons for a species with the right combination of creativity, adaptability, and stubborn refusal to accept defeat that the architects called the Defiance spark, which was necessary to access their most powerful technologies. Amy studied the weapon specifications and defensive systems that the archive revealed to them, and realized that the architect technology was far beyond anything the current galaxy possessed, including the advanced systems used by the Vorthok Empire. However, accessing the technology required more than just technical knowledge because the architects had programmed their systems to respond only to those who truly embodied the defiant spirit that had driven their own species to greatness before their destruction. Ben worked frantically to understand the quantum resonance principles that powered architect technology, while Lisa established communication links with the archive's vast knowledge banks that contained millions of years of scientific advancement. The AI warned them that time was running short, because the Confederation fleets were already moving toward human space and would arrive at Earth within months to begin the systematic destruction of human civilization. Alan realized that the archive contained coordinates for dozens of hidden weapon caches and defense installations scattered throughout the galaxy where the architects had hidden their most powerful technology. Before their final defeat, Jake faced another impossible decision as he looked at the star charts showing the locations of architect installations spread across thousands of light years of space that would require separate missions to reach and activate. The crew would have to split up again, with small teams launching suicide missions to distant star systems while hoping they could recover enough architect technology to give humanity a fighting chance against the overwhelming forces arrayed against them. Maya had been monitoring communications from human space and reported that advanced Confederation scouts had already begun probing the outer colonies with small fleets that tested human defenses and response times. The first skirmishes had begun near the colony world of New Terra, where human fighters equipped with prototype quantum drives had engaged alien scouts in battles that gave both sides valuable information about their enemies' capabilities. The fighting was still limited to small encounters between patrol ships, but everyone knew that the real war would begin soon, when the main Confederation fleets reached human space with enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. Lisa's analysis of the Architect Archive suggested that their technology could indeed give human ships significant advantages in combat, but only if they could reach and activate enough installations before the enemy fleets arrived. The AI provided them with detailed instructions for finding and accessing the hidden architect sites, but warned that each installation would require human crews willing to risk everything to unlock its secrets and bring its weapons online. Jake knew that sending his people to distant corners of the galaxy would likely mean sending them to their deaths, but staying together would accomplish nothing while their species faced extinction at the hands of alien fleets. He gathered his remaining crew in the archive chamber, where the holographic architects watched silently as he prepared to ask for volunteers who would leave their friends behind and travel alone into the unknown darkness. Between stars, President Linda Hayes stood in the Situation Room deep beneath the capital city of Earth, as reports flooded in from every human world about the massive alien fleets that were gathering at the edges of human space like storm clouds preparing to unleash their fury. Admiral Kate Sullivan had positioned the combined human fleet at the outer boundaries of the Sol system, where every available ship from military vessels to converted cargo haulers bristling with improvised weapons waited for the approaching enemy forces. The flagship UES Defiance served as the command center for humanity's desperate defense, while smaller vessels spread throughout the system to provide early warning and coordinate the evacuation of civilian populations to the inner planets. Captain Jake Morrison's team continued their frantic work in the Architect Archive on the distant world in the Kepler 442 system, where they raced against time to understand and implement the ancient technology that might save. Their species engineer Ben Parker had made significant progress integrating quantum resonance shields into human ship designs, but the technology required precise calibration and extraordinary coordination between crew members to function properly during combat operations. Dr. Amy Foster studied architect tactical doctrines that revealed combat strategies based on unity of purpose and absolute dedication to survival that went far beyond normal military training and discipline. The Archive's artificial intelligence, which the crew had begun calling Oracle, provided detailed explanations of how architect technology functioned, but warned them repeatedly about the requirements for accessing its full potential. Oracle explained that architect weapons and defenses had been designed for a specific type of warfare that required crews willing to sacrifice everything for the survival of their species and their way of life. The technology would only respond to those who truly embodied the defiant spirit that the architects had possessed when they faced their own extinction at the hands of fearful alien coalitions millions of years ago. News arrived from human space that advanced Confederation scouts had begun attacking the outer colonies with small fleets, designed to test human defenses and gather intelligence about their military capabilities. Pilot Sam Johnson led a squadron of enhanced fighters equipped with prototype architect technology in the first major engagement of the war, when Vorthak scouts attempted to destroy the research station on Kepler 186. The human ships were vastly outnumbered, but fought with unprecedented ferocity and tactical innovation that surprised both the enemy forces and the human commanders who watched the battle from their command centers. Sam's fighters used quantum phase technology to appear and disappear during combat, while coordinating their attacks with a precision that seemed almost supernatural to observers who had never seen architect technology in action. The prototype systems allowed the human pilots to anticipate enemy movements and coordinate their attacks across impossible distances, while their weapons penetrated alien shields that should have been impenetrable. The success of the enhanced fighters proved that humans could indeed wield the architect legacy, but Oracle delivered sobering news about the true scale of the forces gathering against humanity. The full Confederation fleet numbered over 10,000 vessels from dozens of different species who had united in their determination to prevent humanity from following the same path that had made the architects so threatening. Dr. Alan Carter proposed a desperate gambit based on the coordinates Oracle had provided for hidden weapon caches scattered throughout the galaxy where the architects had stored their most powerful technology. The plan required sending small human teams on suicide missions to distant star systems, where they would attempt to locate and activate ancient installations that had been waiting for millions of years. Jake realized that splitting his forces again would leave each team isolated and vulnerable, but staying together would accomplish nothing. While the Confederation fleets prepared to overwhelm human space Maya, Rodriguez volunteered to lead a mission to the Kepler 186 system, where her communications expertise might be crucial for activating the defense grid that Oracle claimed was hidden in the asteroid belt. Amy Foster requested assignment to the Gliese 667 system, where archaeological evidence suggested the architects had hidden an entire fleet of battleships in a dimensional pocket that could be accessed with the right activation codes. Ben Parker chose to accompany a team heading for the Wolf 359 system, where massive energy signatures indicated the presence of weapon platforms powerful enough to destroy entire fleets if they could be brought online. Each team would travel in modified human ships equipped with basic architect technology, but they would be operating far from any possible support if they encountered enemy forces or technical difficulties. Oracle provided them with activation codes and detailed instructions for each installation, but warned that the ancient technology would test their resolve and their worthiness before allowing them to access its power. The AI explained that architect systems had been programmed to recognize and respond to the defiant spark that characterized species willing to fight against impossible odds for the survival of their people. Jake watched as his friends and colleagues prepared to leave on missions that would likely end in their deaths, but might provide humanity with the weapons needed to survive the coming war. The teams departed from the architect world in different directions as they headed toward distant star systems where ancient secrets waited in the darkness while time continued to run out for their species. Back in human space, Admiral Sullivan received reports that the main Confederation fleets had begun their final approach toward the Sol system with enough firepower to sterilize every human world in a matter of days. The human defense fleet took their final positions around Earth and the inner planets, while civilian populations huddled in underground shelters and hoped that their military forces could perform some kind of miracle. President Hayes delivered what might be humanity's final message to the galaxy, as she broadcast a declaration that humans would never surrender their freedom, regardless of the odds they faced. The message reached every human ship and outpost throughout known space, as well as alien monitoring stations, where Confederation commanders prepared for what they expected to be a brief and decisive campaign. Oracle's voice echoed through the Architect archive as Jake prepared to coordinate the activation of ancient weapons from his position in the command center that had been built by a species that faced the same choice. The AI reminded him that the architects had possessed the technology to defend themselves, but had ultimately failed because they had not fully embraced the defiant spirit that their own systems required. Humanity would succeed or fail, based on their willingness to fight beyond reason and refuse to accept defeat, even when victory seemed impossible according to every rational calculation. Jake looked at the tactical displays showing enemy fleets approaching human space, while his scattered teams raced to reach their assigned targets before the final battle began. The fate of humanity depended on whether they could prove themselves worthy of the architect legacy by demonstrating the kind of defiance that had made the ancient species so feared by their enemies. The Confederation fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, like a swarm of metallic locusts that blotted out entire sections of Starfield, as Supreme Commander Zektar surveyed the pathetic human defenses that awaited his overwhelming force. Admiral Kate Sullivan watched from the bridge of the UES Defiance as her sensors counted over 10,000 enemy vessels, ranging from massive Vorthak dreadnoughts to sleek attack fighters from dozens of different species united in their determination to crush humanity. The human fleet looked pitifully small in comparison, with only 300 ships of various sizes and capabilities positioned around Earth and the inner planets where billions of people waited in underground shelters. For news of the battle, Zektar opened communication channels and delivered the final ultimatum in his ancient and arrogant voice that had commanded fleets for over 2 centuries of Vorthak dominance throughout the galaxy. Surrender now, and your species will be allowed to exist under our guidance, the alien commander announced with the certainty of someone who had never faced serious opposition to his overwhelming military superiority. Admiral Sullivan responded with words that would echo throughout galactic history as she rejected the alien ultimatum and declared humanity's intention to fight for their freedom, regardless of the cost. The first phase of the battle erupted across the outer system as Confederation forces advanced in perfect formation, while human ships began their desperate defense using a combination of human ingenuity and architect technology. Despite their technological upgrades, the human vessels were still outnumbered more than 30-1 as alien weapons tore through their defensive formations and destroyed entire squadrons in the opening minutes. But something unexpected began to happen as the battle intensified and human crews found themselves fighting with coordination and determination that surprised even their own commanders who watched from the fleet command centers. The architect technology did not simply provide better weapons and shields, but seemed to amplify human creativity and tactical adaptability in ways that made their responses unpredictable and effective against superior numbers. Captain Jake Morrison coordinated the battle from his position in the Architect Command Center on the distant world, where Oracle provided real-time tactical analysis and strategic guidance based on combat data from the Sol system. The scattered human teams across the galaxy began reporting their successes as they activated ancient installations that had been waiting millions of years for species brave enough to claim the Architect Legacy Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez's team on Kepler 186 successfully brought online a massive defense grid that materialized from quantum space and began systematically destroying Confederation supply convoys attempting to reach the main. Fleet Dr. Amy Foster's archaeological expedition to Gliese 6067 recovered an entire fleet of Architect battleships that had been hidden in dimensional pockets and could phase directly into the Sol system battle. The ancient vessels appeared without warning among the Confederation formations and began attacking with weapons that penetrated alien shields and armor as if they were made of paper instead of advanced materials. Engineer Ben Parker's team at Wolf 359 activated weapon platforms that fired quantum disruption beams across interstellar distances to strike enemy command ships in the middle of the battle zone. As more Architect systems came online throughout the galaxy, the human forces in the Sol system began displaying impossible combat capabilities that defied everything the Confederation knew about warfare. Human ships started performing maneuvers that should have been impossible, as their crews seemed to anticipate enemy movements with supernatural precision while coordinating attacks across vast distances. Oracle's voice began echoing across all human communication channels as the ancient AI explained that the Architect technology was responding not just to human DNA, but to something much deeper and more powerful. Defiant spark that the Architects had recognized in humanity was the same quality that had made the ancient species so feared by their enemies who had eventually united to destroy them millions of years ago. The tide of battle began to shift as human vessels that should have been destroyed continued fighting with crews that refused to surrender, even when their ships were crippled and their weapon systems failing. Confederation formations that had expected easy victory found themselves facing an enemy that grew stronger and more coordinated as the battle progressed, instead of weakening under the pressure of superior firepower. Individual human pilots began performing feats that bordered on miraculous as they destroyed enemy ships, many times larger and more powerful, while their vessels danced through space with impossible grace. The quantum resonance technology allowed human crews to share tactical awareness and emotional determination across their entire fleet as if they were fighting as a single unified organism instead of separate ships. Supreme Commander Zektar watched his carefully planned assault dissolve into chaos as his forces encountered resistance that grew more effective with each passing hour of combat. Alien Commander had fought hundreds of battles during his long career, but had never faced an enemy that refused to break even when facing certain destruction from overwhelming opposition. His tactical advisors reported impossible human casualties and equipment losses that should have ended their resistance hours ago. But somehow the surviving ships fought with even greater determination. Oracle revealed to Jake that the Architect technology had been designed to preserve and amplify the defiant spirit of species that possessed it by creating quantum links between crew members that shared their courage and resolve. As the battle reached its climax, Zektar revealed the Confederation's final weapon that represented everything they feared about allowing defiant species to survive and inspire others to resist. The massive planet killer had been built from the combined resources of a dozen species and carried enough firepower to crack planets and sterilize entire star systems in a single devastating attack. The weapon began its charging sequence as it moved toward Earth, while Confederation forces provided cover against the desperate human ships that converged from throughout the system to stop it. Admiral Sullivan led the final assault aboard the heavily damaged UES Defiance, while her remaining ships formed up for one last desperate charge against the alien superweapon that threatened to end their species. Jake realized that this moment would determine not just the survival of humanity but the future of the entire galaxy, as Oracle explained the true stakes of the battle they were fighting. If the Confederation succeeded in destroying Earth and breaking human resistance, it would prove that Defiance was futile and ensure that no other species would dare to challenge the established order. But if humanity somehow managed to survive and win, it would send a message throughout the galaxy that freedom was possible, and that courage could triumph over tyrannical power. The planet killer's weapons reached full charge as human forces made their final approach through devastating enemy fire that destroyed dozens of ships in the last few minutes before impact. Every human ship in the Sol system converged on the Confederation planet killer in a desperate final assault that would determine the fate of their species and the future of galactic civilization. Admiral Kate Sullivan led the charge aboard the heavily damaged UES Defiance, while her remaining vessels formed a spearhead formation that drove straight through the enemy defensive lines, protecting the massive superweapon. Captain Jake Morrison provided tactical coordination from the Architect Command Center as Oracle analyzed the Planet Killer's structure and transmitted targeting data to the human fleet attacking the alien weapon. The battle had become a race against time as the Planet Killer's charging sequence approached completion, and its devastating weapons prepared to unleash enough energy to crack the Earth like an eggshell. Human ships now fully integrated with Architect technology performed feats that should have been impossible as they phased through enemy fire and predicted attack patterns with perfect accuracy. The quantum resonance systems allowed human crews to coordinate their attacks across impossible distances, while sharing tactical information and emotional determination through the neural links that connected their vessels. Supreme Commander Zektar watched in disbelief as his supposedly inferior enemies continued their suicidal assault, despite losing dozens of ships to the concentrated firepower of his defensive formations. Oracle revealed the final secret of the Architect legacy to Jake and the human commanders, who listened with growing amazement as they learned the true nature of the technology they wielded. The ancient systems did not just respond to the Defiance spark, but actually preserved and amplified it by recording every act of courage and resistance that had occurred throughout galactic history. Every species that had ever refused to surrender, and every individual who had chosen to fight against impossible odds had left an impression in the quantum matrix that underlay all Architect technology. As the human forces pressed their attack, something extraordinary began to happen throughout the galaxy, as ancient Architect installations awakened in response to humanity's desperate stand-weapon platforms that had been dormant for millions of years came online, while defensive shields activated around worlds that had never known they possessed such protection. The very fabric of space seemed to respond to human defiance, as quantum energies flowed through hyperspace gates and ancient communication networks that spanned the entire galaxy. Long-dead civilizations that had been destroyed for their refusal to submit began to speak through the Architect systems as their recorded spirits joined the battle for freedom. Jake realized that humanity was not fighting alone, but had become the focal point for every act of defiance that had ever occurred since the Architects first built their galactic network. The Planet Killers' weapons reached full charge as Admiral Sullivan's fleet broke through the final defensive line and began their attack run on the massive weapon that threatened to end their world pilot. Sam Johnson found his fighter crippled and systems failing as enemy fire overwhelmed his ship's defenses, but he continued his approach toward the Planet Killer's core reactor. His vessel phased through the superweapon shields, using pure Architect technology while he transmitted a message that echoed across every communication channel in the galaxy. "We are human," Sam announced with calm determination as his damaged fighter approached the reactor core that powered the alien weapon. "We do not yield, and we do not surrender. We will never bow," he continued, as his ship penetrated the Planet Killer's defenses and prepared to deliver the strike that would determine the outcome of the battle. The explosion that followed Sam's sacrifice created a chain reaction that tore through the massive weapon and disabled much of the Confederation fleet as secondary. Explosions rippled through their formations, but more importantly, the destruction of the Planet Killer sent a quantum pulse through the Architect network that reached every corner of the galaxy where oppressed species received humanity's message. The signal was clear and unmistakable to anyone who had ever dreamed of freedom. Defiance was possible, and courage could triumph over tyranny, if beings were willing to pay the price. Supreme Commander Zektar ordered his remaining forces to retreat, as his carefully planned campaign collapsed into chaos, and his allies began questioning their commitment to the war. The Confederation fleet limped away from the Sol system in defeat, while human ships that should have been destroyed continued to fight with crews that refused to accept anything less than total victory. 6 months later, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted as the Confederation sued for peace, and their ancient alliance began fragmenting under the pressure of internal dissent. Member species throughout the galaxy began questioning the established order that had kept them subservient for millennia. While human ships carried the message of defiance to distant star systems, Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to admiral, stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned UES Architect, humanity's first fully integrated architect technology vessel. The ship represented not just human technological achievement, but the partnership between humanity and the ancient civilization that had chosen them as worthy heirs to their legacy. Oracle's voice spoke to him one final time as he looked out at the stars where human vessels were departing for missions of liberation rather than conquest. Their architects are gone, but their legacy lives on in those brave enough to carry it forward, the ancient AI said with something that sounded almost like satisfaction. You have become what we once were, Oracle continued as its consciousness began to fade into the quantum matrix that connected all architect technology throughout the galaxy. The defiant ones who refused to let the universe dictate the limits of what is possible, the AI concluded before falling silent forever. Human exploration fleets were already heading toward distant galaxies, where other species might be struggling against their own forms of oppression and tyranny. The message they carried was simple, but powerful. Freedom was not a privilege granted by the strong, but a right that could be claimed by anyone willing to fight for it. Earth's children scattered among the stars not as conquerors seeking empire, but as liberators carrying the flame of defiance to every corner of the universe, where it might take root in the quantum realm that underlay all reality. The spirits of the architects finally found peace, knowing that their sacrifice had not been in vain and their legacy would continue. Humanity had proven that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds, and that the defiant spark could never truly be extinguished, as long as free beings drew breath. The stars themselves had witnessed humanity's stand and would remember it forever as the moment when the galaxy learned that tyranny could be defeated by those who refused to surrender.